Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our Outlier Suspense video series. I am your host, John Robb, and I am joined here by an author that I just recently found. Her name is Jacqueline Bublitz. So, Jacqueline, how are you doing? Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for finding me. I am very
I,
happy to be
I'm
here.
very excited. I got an email from your publicist, started looking, got the book, and I'm like, now this is a book that I like to get into. Serial killers, cat and mouse game. What's happening with the past? The past is never
Mhm.
dead and the past comes back. And we're talking about your latest book, what comes out October 29th. So when people see the video, they'll be able to buy a copy of Leave the Girls Behind.
Yep.
So why don't you share with us a little bit about what you got going on with us?
Sure. So Leave the Girls Behind is actually my second novel. My first was Before You Knew My Name, and that came out in the States at least in November 2022. So Leave the Girls Behind, it's not a sequel, but it's certainly a follow-on and exists in universe. It's set a year after uh, Before You Knew My Name was in 2014 in New York City. This is 2015 for some very specific reasons. And so it is about our protagonist is Ruth Ann Baker. She is a citizen detective who is sworn off true crime for reasons that we'll find out as her story progresses. But when a little girl goes missing from Ruthie's hometown, her former hometown, she finds herself drawn back into a case that's haunted her, perhaps literally, for 19 years, and that's the kidnapping and murder of her childhood best friend, Beth. Now, that murderer, Ethan Oswald, is dead. That's not a spoiler. That is something that's made obvious to the reader up front. But when Ruthie fails at staying away from true crime and starts to investigate this new case of a little girl who's gone missing, she uncovers some new evidence that triggers some latent ideas she's had about the fact that this convicted killer Oswald had other victims. Not only that, she discovers that he may also have had an accomplice, but this accomplice may have been a woman, a female partner in crime, who helped him commit or at least cover up his crimes. So yeah, there's a bit going on.
There is. Now, let's kind of get in a little bit to, Ruth Ann Baker, who is the main character of the book. What was it about her that you were like, yep, she's the one. She's the one that I want to have lead my story. Talk a little bit about her creation and how you
Right.
kind of started coming up with her.
I love that question because for a long time, I grappled with who would tell the story. There's a cast of there's three women who Ruthie, I call her, as family and friends call her. She seems kind of real to me. There's three women that she investigates who have had connections, different connections to murderous men at various points in their lives. And while I was workshopping the novel, I really could have told the story from any of their perspectives. They all have such rich backstories, and I tend to feel like I actually know, my characters as real people, which can be interesting to hang around with me when I'm writing. But I chose Ruthie because I think she's the embodiment of, or I hope she's the embodiment of how hard it is to get to the truth of a matter and how hard it is even to tell your own story. So this is essentially a novel that is a mystery, and it deals with trauma and how that it impacts our memories and also how we see ourselves in the world, who we are and how we see ourselves in the world. And for Ruthie, a person who's got her fair share of trauma and her fair share of processing issues when it comes to her place in the world, she became the perfect person to tell this story that is really about sort of mimicking when we get obsessed with a cold case, an unsolved murder, for example, like a true crime case, we can have all the theories in the world, but unless, like with the golden, I was want to call him the golden gate killer, the golden state killer, unless that
Right.
actually gets solved, we're not actually going to know what happened. So she's the embodiment of that for me, which makes her an unreliable character, but for very good reasons.
Now, it drugs up a lot of emotion for her too. 19 years, this terrific crime happened, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's, while she's still kind of thinking about it, I mean, it's also time will eventually kind of get out of her mind, and then bam, it kind of
Mm-hmm.
throws at her right back in her face again. So when you were kind of constructing the book and the emotions within the characters, how did you want the reader to kind of, you know, feel for Ruth Ann and the emotional state that she was been in when all of a sudden, bam, she's thrust back into this situation that she kind of hoped was not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's like love her, but don't trust her.
Right.
Right? I want people to love her. I've tried to flesh out a world for her with, especially with the supporting cast of characters. She's got a great group of people around her. But she's completely untrustworthy, and she knows it. Like there's an anchor quote in the epigraph around chasing red herrings, and that's really what Ruthie is doing through the book. And I would love it if readers were able to go on that journey with her and see how ultimately sometimes like the longest bow or the longest string shows how I don't know much about archery. When you're drawing, a very
Right. Right.
long bow or string, one of those, someone can let me know on Insta. But yeah, even when she's making these sort of ridiculous assumptions, they come from a place of earnestly wanting to know what happened to her best friend, and also ultimately what happened to her, which is not coincidentally the name of the website that she keeps going back to get her information. So yeah, I hope that people love her and empathize with her and understand that she's not meant to be she's someone who doesn't really have any skills to solve this crime. That is not actually, if she'd stayed in school perhaps and she wanted to be a criminal profiler. But I love that her boss Owen, when he says or references it right at the beginning, a bartender has as much chance of predicting that there's a murderer in the room as a criminal profiler does. Whether I think that's true or not, I really wanted to sort of play with that notion of how we all as citizen detectives, I mean, I'm assuming most people who read crime thrillers, mystery, have some little kind of badge in their pocket when it comes to being a citizen detective. Yeah, how we sometimes, if we become obsessed with a case and thinking about I'll Be Gone in the Dark with Michelle McNamara, it's a good example of you can become from the outside really, really heavily invested in solving a crime. So imagine you were also on the inside of that crime.
Right. Now, when you look back at your first book before you knew my name, and now you decided, okay, I'm going to write a second one, and there's the second one. But what were you thinking that you wanted to change, maybe writing style? Were you like, okay, in my second book, I'm going to do more dialogue, or I'm going to do more scene setting, or I'm going to do more emotional, connection with the characters? Was there something consciously that you decided from the first to the second book that you wanted to strengthen yourself as an author or showcase more of your talent?
Yeah, I love that question too. Yes. So I considered myself with the first book an accidental crime writer. I didn't know I was writing a crime novel. The first I sort of heard of it being marketed as such, and I have amazing teams around the world that look after me, was in Australia when it was in the crime section of a particular bookstore, and I think they were promoting it as their crime book of the month, which I know I'm so lucky that happened, but I was also confused, like, what? No, it's not a crime novel. And then I came to be really embraced by the crime community, and realized that also, the nonfiction that I'd been reading and obsessing over for a long time was mostly around crime or criminal behavior and victimology. So with this book, to answer that question, I wanted to embrace my new role as a crime writer. So I wanted to honor, there's lots of little Easter egg type moments in there honoring Dame Ngaio Marsh, who was one of the queens of crime, right up there with, or a contemporary of Agatha Christie back in the day. She's a New Zealander. I'm a New Zealander. I hadn't even heard of her, which is like really like something that I was embarrassed to realize. And that there was this whole community of, we call it the Yeah Noir, which is a play on how New Zealanders and Australians like to say yeah nah when we're talking to people, and no one knows if we're like, does that mean yes or does that mean no? And none of us can agree on it, by the way. But the Yeah Noir community, so I embraced being a part of that community. This book is my sort of love letter in many ways to the community that embraced me with this first book. And now I am, and hopefully with my third book, which is in universe. Again, it'll be set a year after that. I can sort of round out my crime trilogy, and then see where the writing gods take me from there.
So That's good. So you're saying that these three books are going to be in somewhat kind of a loose kind of trilogy,
Yep.
is what you're doing.
Well,
Um,
I mean, yeah. So
did you
they're
start
in
out
like
that
say
way? Did you start out thinking that was going to happen, or no? You didn't think that.
well, I said the first book deliberately in 2014. I don't know. Sometimes it's like past me. I'm like, wow, thank you so much. I mean, a lot of the time in my life, I'm like, past me, thanks for getting me into this situation. But when it comes to my writing career, past me tends to be quite generous. And I had deliberately set, before you knew my name, my books have such mouthful titles. I had set my first book in 2014, New York City, because I was conscious that a year later we were going to be going into quite a different environment with the presidential nominees and a lot that was going to happen in the next few years. The narrative around gender and then the Me Too movement and all of these things started happening. So I said it in 2014 to give myself a grace period of just dealing with that particular story outside of context. 2015, it's subtle, but I've put in a few things that were happening. There's some characters arguing about who should be able to run for president. There's some commentary toward the end of the book about the feeling that social media was getting even more sort of vitriolic maybe than it had been in the past. It's subtle. And then 2016, which was a big year, 2016 will be my third novel, and then it really is coming into what will then be the beginning of the Me Too movement, without writing a book about the Me Too movement, because there are people far more suited to doing that than I am. Yeah, so I guess it past me said 2014, and then it made perfect sense to have this epoch, this really sort of this time where there was a lot going on and a lot of dialogue about gendered crime, which is what I'm clearly writing about. And then I also fully avoid the pandemic coming. I'm safely in
Right.
this kind of like little space for now, which is good as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that a lot of crime writers didn't really introduce the pandemic because that was really just a hell we didn't want to relive in our
No,
books.
no.
I
I
mean,
mean,
let's just
I can feel that there will be some, there are some books that, started to, that have been written about that time and like that
yeah,
claustrophobic time for, many, but we also had such vastly different experiences. I was here in New Zealand, absolutely locked down, couldn't come or go from our borders, but also we had a like relative to most of the world, we were very safe and we were still going to concerts and doing like, yeah, I would not want to touch that, especially since I like to set my books in New York City and then, which is something I've done with the second book more overtly, is introduce other places. Like we've got Norway and we've got New Zealand. Well, I'm all about triplicity in this book. So New Zealand, Norway, and then New York, which I realize is not a country, but it feels like its own country to
it feels
me.
like its own country. I've been in New York. Yeah, I mean, New York is definitely. I mean, there's people when you go to New York, you never really have to leave. You have all the food that you want there, all the culture that you
Don't
want
say
there.
that
And
because
it's,
I never do want to leave, but it's a place that I'm lucky enough to be able to visit a lot now because of my job, or like the excuse of my job. I need to go for some research.
exactly.
I was just there in July, but there was a lot of Broadway shows, which was not entirely research, but important for the creative juices to get flowing.
Mhm. Now, when you decided that you kind of wanted to become a writer, this was this the genre that you wanted to get into? Did you have books before, before your first book that just didn't really hit, and then all of a sudden, bam, this one kind of made it?
Well, I wrote. I mean, I had no idea for the longest time how you wrote a book, and it's something I'm really I love talking to new and emerging writers now about how you go from knowing that you can write a really good sentence or you craft a lovely paragraph, but it's stopping there, not knowing how you extrapolate that
Right.
out into a novel. And that's something I've learned to do because of the stories that I've hit on that I want to tell. I did write a manuscript a fair few years ago. What is time these days? But more than a decade ago. And I would not have called that a crime novel, but it does begin with a crime. So I think I've been ignoring, much like Ruthie does sometimes, I guess, ignoring what's right in front of me or not seeing myself in the mirror, because that first manuscript began with a crime that I had somewhat ripped from the headlines. And when I hit on the idea for Before You Knew My Name, that was from a real life murder that happened on my street. And from that, I realized that I wanted to, first of all, I was so, I wanted to know everything about that case, and it really wasn't being talked about for various reasons. And then I started to think about, well, what version of that story could I tell respectfully? Hence the accidental crime writer sort of journey that I went on, because yeah, both of my first efforts at finishing a book were centered around crimes that had actually happened, if not on my street, then around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? I mean, if you want, you're not, people say, where do you get your inspiration? I was like, just living in this world,
Just
just
living.
like,
Living
just
is
living
inspiration.
or trying to stay,
Right.
I'm not someone who walks around, looking over my shoulder um, necessarily all of the time, but certainly being aware of what I call navigating my safety has been the common thread. I'm a very privileged person who has, one thing that she's always needed to be conscious of, which is navigating my safety, especially when I travel alone, which I've been doing since I was 16 years old. So I think that's probably at its, at its core, that's where these stories have come from.
Nice.
Mm.
So how do you like this world? I mean, now that you're into this writing world, now that you're kind of out there, you're in social media. I mean, your website, JacquelineBublitz.com, is a place where everyone can find out about you. I heard you mention Instagram. Is that the social media place where you kind of, call home the most?
Yeah, Instagram for me is, I love that you can put up a short, sharp story and say, this is what, I mean, there is so much going on in the world at the moment. And I'm well aware of that, that I've got some really incredible things going on at a time when there's just so much going on that is so rough for so many people. With Instagram, I find is a really nice balance of, here's what's going on in my world, and also, hey, I'm aware of what's going on in the world, but I'm not, over on Twitter. Well, I know it's X now, giving my opinion on things
Whatever.
that I'm not qualified to give my opinion on. I also like the fact that it's a great, Insta's a great way to, like communicate with bookstagrammers and readers who are really passionate. I love the visual, because I'm not a visual person. I've got that thing that I never remember the name, where I can't see anything in my head. I don't know actually what's up there. It's ideas and feelings, but there's no, tell me to see an elephant, I don't see an elephant. So I love Instagram for the creativity of other people as well. And yeah, my website is a work in progress at the moment, but certainly I'll be endeavoring to keep that updated with bits and bobs about interviews and things. And just, I'm someone who loves, might be able to tell, I quite like this aspect of as much as it makes me nervous, and I never did this in my life before. I would sit at the back of a room if I was at a work conference in my old life, in my sales job. I would never do a gosh, I've blanked out on the name because I hated it so much. When they, the mock, the things you have to do when, you go up and you do a role play and stuff like that. I never did any of that because I've always wanted, I've always wanted to, I like authenticity. And so this has been really amazing, this part of the journey in this world. How do I like this world? I love that I get to be, yeah, or share authentic pieces of myself. And then also I'm super learning about myself as well. Because maybe I hadn't questioned for a while, well, why am I writing this genre? And then someone asked me an insightful question. I'm like, oh yeah,
There you go.
actually, here's where it comes from. So I love it. It's nerve-wracking. There's a lot of waiting around. There's also, while people, work their magic in the background, which I'm not used to because I've always worked in jobs where I'm the one who has to, in sales and marketing, where I'm the one who has to generate the sale or the marketing buzz, or, with other members of my team. But it's been a bit of a dream ride, and I know it won't always be that way, but I'm very grateful, and just a sponge. I'm just trying to learn everything I can at the moment, inside and outside of this business, because
Fantastic.
I did not know anything about it when I first came in, except that I wanted to be part of it, which is an interesting way to approach something. I know nothing about it, but I want to be part of
Welcome.
it.
Here we go. You're in now.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much for just spending a couple minutes to talk to us about Leave the Girls Behind, get a little bit into your career. It's fascinating. We wish you nothing but the best. Again, everybody, the book will be out October 29th in whatever format you want to buy it on. It's going to be on Audible, Kindle, paperback, however you want to get it. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us again. Wish you nothing but the best. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Same. You have a great one. Bye-bye.